A lot of people know L-carnitine as a fat burner. Technically, there is some truth to that, but honestly, there's so much more to L-carnitine that most people don't know about. L-carnitine is one of my favorite supplements because when you actually understand its physiology, we're talking mitochondrial function, so energy production, exercise recovery, potentially increasing androgen receptor sensitivity, cognition, fertility, blood flow. There's so much to this supplement that most people don't know. However, it gets confusing because you have all the different forms. You have L-carnitine, Acetyl L-Carnitine, L-Carnitine Tartrate, and then you have oral and you have injectable. So today I want to go ahead and break down L-carnitine, the different forms, its risks, its benefits, and its downsides, things to be worried about like TMAO. And quick disclaimer before we get started, this is for educational purposes only, not medical advice. So first off, let's chat about L-carnitine. L-carnitine is a naturally occurring compound that your body can make from amino acids, lysine and methionine. You also get it from your diet, particularly from animal products, and that's most often through red meat, which makes sense because the Latin word carnitine comes from the word flesh. So this is a compound. If you're more vegetable heavy and you're not eating much meat, you may be low on as far as using it for optimization. Now, the analogy I usually use for L-carnitine is I think about your mitochondria like a coal-fired power plant, and your fatty acids are the coal that we need to get into the plant. So you got this big giant pile of coal that's sitting outside of your power plant. It doesn't do you any good. And that's where carnitine comes in. You can think about L-carnitine like an empty coal truck. It goes and picks up these long-chain fatty acids, gets them activated, and takes them into the cell's mitochondria, where there they can be burned for energy. The truck then gets recycled, and it starts over again. So L-carnitine isn't really the furnace. It's actually the truck that is the shuttle. Ultimately, it's what allows you have your mitochondria, you have this shuttle that L-carnitine is used to help get things inside of the cell. So it's actually more for transportation. And you can think, oh, wow, if we can get more energy into our power plant, then that's probably going to have a ton of benefits. So does carnitine actually burn fat? Maybe not in the way of taking lots of maybe caffeine or thyroid or hitting the glucagon receptor with our old friend retatrutide. And all of these things work in different mechanisms. And we do have some research, though, that shows modest improvements in body weight and in particular losing fat mass when people supplement with L-carnitine. There are meta-analyses that show roughly 1 to 2 kilograms of additional weight loss depending on the population. So again, to put that in perspective, a handful of pounds, this is not the same as doing like a tirzepatide or a Retta. And you're also not going to just sit on a couch eating 4,000 calories a day and not exercising and then just drink some L-carnitine and have it burn your body fat off. L-carnitine is really going to be a catalyst that when you're working out, we're going to talk about some of these other benefits below that are going to help you reach your goal. And that's why we have supplements. They should be supplementing and actually helping you reach your goal. They're not going to be doing it for you. So, if you're here and you've I'm going to take L-carnitine for weight loss, go get your hormones checked, go get your thyroid checked first, and then adding L-carnitine, as we will discuss in a bit, can definitely help you out. Now, one of my favorite things to talk about with L-carnitine, if you've been at the channel before, I probably brought it up briefly, is that there's exciting research and some hypothesis about how L-carnitine might help with testosterone and your androgen receptors. Now, we're not really sure. There's only a few research studies. They suggest that L-Carnitine Tartrate can increase androgen receptor in the context of skeletal muscles, right? So you have your muscles, your androgen receptors, and that's where testosterone goes into your cells and your muscles, and then it'll tell us to do things like increase protein synthesis, increase glycogen retention. So things that testosterone tells our body to do, and then we have certain receptors that are outside, all over our body, and in particularly, this is in muscles. And that's where then people start saying that L-carnitine is a testosterone booster, and when most people think that, they think, oh, the serum testosterone levels go up. There may be some evidence for that, but really what we're seeing is that it's probably inside the muscle, increasing its sensitivity or maybe the density of the androgen receptors. And so you can think about this more so like if you have a messenger and you have, or it might be like you got a boombox and you bring it up, you're like, hey, I got to send this message over yonder to wherever. And what the L-carnitine is going to do is just increase the music, increase the signaling, increase the ability for testosterone to talk to your muscle cell. So if that's to, build more muscle, then having L-carnitine is going to help testosterone talk to the cell to increase that output. And I mean, technically you could view it the other way, because this is something that we're still kind of figuring out. Is it A, increasing the volume of the testosterone, or is it B, increasing the ability for your cell to hear, right? So is it increasing the sensitivity? Is it increasing the density of the receptors? I've still kind of heard varying hypotheses on this, but overall, it's seeming like it just makes your testosterone more potent. So to be very clear here, we don't have like 100% proven mechanism of action on this. We just have a couple studies that seemed like overall that L-carnitine helped give us better testosterone benefits. And then really this one study was done particularly in skeletal muscles. So, probably could also work in your neurons, could also work in your brain, could also be working in other parts of your body. We just don't have a lot of research on it. And that's something I've chatted about before is, someone's got to pay for the research. So it'd be really great if someone would, how we say, hero this supplement and get more research done on it. The issue is if someone does more research on L-carnitine, it's not like they can patent it and make millions of dollars. So just have to be out of the goodness of someone's heart. So someone out there, you have a couple coins laying around. It'd be really cool if you could maybe investigate this area and throw some money down, and we could really figure out what's going on as far as testosterone goes with androgen receptors. And, this does kind of lead into a lot of these other topics. It's hard to figure out, chicken or the egg, because there is some evidence that L-carnitine can help with exercise recovery. So on one end, we've already talked about its, ability to help with the mitochondria and with testosterone, but we do have some studies that show reduced markers in muscle damage. It's improving recovery for resistance training. And like I said, theoretically, that could be from the androgen receptors. Testosterone obviously plays a huge role in, again, muscle protein synthesis, recovery, just overall adaptation. However, carnitine does appear to have several direct effects that could contribute beside that. So, you're supporting the mitochondria. That's going to help your metabolic efficiency. That's going to help with oxidative stress. And there's also some interesting research we'll chat about, which helps with blood flow and endothelial function. So you're starting to see how all of these things really start to overlap. So you can think about that, a muscle cell that can produce more energy. You can not only be more efficient, but from, I talk about this a lot with creatine, because creatine also helps your mitochondria. It helps you produce more ATP. So it's not like, with creatine, it's not like you just take it and you get stronger. What happens with creatine is, if let's just say you can bench press 225 3 times, if you start supplementing with creatine, you're increasing your body's instant storage of energy. That's what's used first. So you can go from maybe benching 225 3 times to 4 times. Okay, so now, you have that adaptation that your nervous system, muscles obviously have to have. And then over a longer period of time, you can stair step. Maybe you hit 5 reps and then, there you go. And then the same thing would happen if you're taking something like L-carnitine. So if you're exercising, you're able to have more efficient energy output. You're able to push your muscles and even your nervous system further, right? And then you get an adaptation of, energy production and overall recovery. And that's one of the reasons, when I was in the bodybuilding world, L-Carnitine Tartrate, that was super popular. And we'll chat about the differences here in a bit. Now, as you know, you've been around here for a while, I really love brain stuff, right? And so L-Carnitine is definitely at the top of my list for nootropics. And in this area, we actually have a little bit more information on acetyl L-Carnitine. And this is where I kind of want to talk about a misconception, and that's kind of whether or not L-Carnitine versus acetyl L-Carnitine, when is, more superior. In brain stuff, we just have more research as far as acetyl L-Carnitine goes. And there is evidence that it seems that it plays more of a role on the central nervous system. And that's why, in part, generally, when people are thinking about the brain, they go towards acetyl L-Carnitine. And again, we can think cognition. We go back to thinking about our mitochondria, and your brain is very energy hungry. And if you know anything about, glucose, ketones, et cetera, the more energy that you can get to your brain, often the better. and the more different avenues by which you can get your brain, the better. I mean, how many people now are actually taking ketones who aren't in ketosis because they're like, okay, so I'm going to get, just regular glucose from whatever I'm eating, and then I can take some ketones and then throw in some L-carnitine and then maybe throw in some methylene blue and some creatine. So your brain has a variety of ways to pull in and optimize its energy. Now, the research we have on acetyl L-carnitine is actually pretty modest. There's some stuff with age-related cognitive decline, dementia, mild cognition impairment, and actually some neuropathies. So there seems to be, L-carnitine can probably help out your nerve cells. But again, if you're a healthy 25-year-old, I'm not convinced that taking acetyl L-carnitine is going to turn you into, Bradley Cooper and Limitless. But, if you're running on low sleep, you're exercising a lot. And, if you've been around this channel long enough, you kind of know my opinion on, dis-ease versus overall optimization. And I do too think as we age, we'll chat how that ultimately your L-carnitine production slows down, its ability to repair and regenerate, just like hormones, just like everything else. So I think supplementing is probably a low risk, high reward as far as the long term goes, especially if it's going to be feeding your neurons and your mitochondria throughout your body. Now, one I hear a lot about is going to be blood flow and nitric oxide. I think most of us, as far as the research goes, for this category, we're going to be leaning on the citrulline and the arginine. But there is some research that suggests that carnitine derivatives, in particular, can affect the endothelial function. And now, again, I'm not putting this, and I don't know if I really want to call it a nitric oxide booster. The issue I will say is citrulline, if you're not taking 6 to 8 grams, that's another big conversation about nitric oxide. It's like, cool, you're taking 200 milligrams. It's like, if I give you 10 milligrams of caffeine, is that really doing anything? So side note, if you're taking a nitric oxide booster, just make sure you have actual clinical dosing, and we'll chat about L-carnitine dosing in a little bit. Now, what L-carnitine seems to actually do is actually kind of more give health to the endothelial lining, where nitric oxide is going to be more so vasodilating, right? So its job there is to open up the blood vessels, and it does clean out the endothelial lining. But what little research we have, it seems like L-carnitine does a better job of improving the endothelial lining, and that's probably, again, something to do with the mitochondria. Is it doing to reducing oxidative stress? Because oxidative stress in the blood vessels is what's going to actually lead to arterial and atherosclerosis. It's not just cholesterol. Cholesterol is what goes underneath the endothelial lining. It causes the foam cells and da-da-da. So it's not like, again, cholesterol. I'm not one to rip on cholesterol. I think cholesterol has more to do with the environment that you're in. So again, you got high cholesterol and you're worried about arterial and atherosclerosis, like maybe some L-carnitine would be something you should chat with your practitioner about adding on. So I think overall, when I think about L-carnitine, I still view it kind of more broadly. I'm not going to go in for a direct mechanism of action, but it seems like it does help with just overall heart health. And again, probably a low risk, high reward, except for TMAO, which we'll chat about. Now, another area that L-carnitine has seemed to become a staple for is going to be male fertility. Carnitine concentrations are extremely high in your male's reproductive tract, especially around the epididymis. That's part of your testicles, and then you have your Leydig and Sertoli cells, more so your Sertoli cells, which are supporting this production of sperm. And in this whole area, you have lots of L-carnitine. So sperm are another perfect example of cells that require a ton of energy, and they have to move, and they have to maintain their membrane integrity, and they have to deal with a ton of oxidative stress. So there's plenty of research that has shown improvements in sperm parameters, not only in research, but anecdotally. I think a lot of people will tell you, anyone who has had poor sperm counts, or in particular, poor sperm motility, L-carnitine has definitely been something that I've seen anecdotally work in practice. And again, this is a more particular one. And if I had to pick, it seems like acetyl L-carnitine might be slightly superior. We'll break that down here in a little bit, but that's usually the go-to, same like we chatted about with Cognition, as far as, what's going to help improve sperm motility and hopefully guaranteeing more successful pregnancy. But mechanistically, it makes a whole lot of sense. It's helping your brain, it's helping your muscles, probably going to also help your sperm. So these are tissues that are very metabolically demanding. And so L-carnitine, in my opinion, seems to be one of the right compounds for the job. And now let's break down the forms of L-carnitine, So first you just have regular old L-carnitine or levocarnitine, and this is essentially your general purpose. So if we go back to the coal truck analogy, it's kind of like an empty coal truck. Its primary physiological role is to help shuttle the fatty acids into the mitochondria. And then we have acetyl, which comes from, or L, so people call it L-car. And again, this L-carnitine just has an acetyl group attached to it. So you can make an argument that it's kind of like slightly more active, but I don't want to think about it like the coal truck, that has the coal full. Maybe you could say it's just slightly more ready to go. It's got a tow hook or something else that helps it, makes things run, maybe a newer addition. I gotta think of probably a better analogy for that. But it's just essentially, it's carrying 2-carbon acetyl group. It's not a long chain fatty acid, which is what we're actually trying to get in there. Then we also have L-Carnitine Tartrate, and that is basically L-Carnitine that is connected to tartaric acid. And this is what shows up in a lot of the exercise performance, muscle recovery, androgen receptor research. So to simplify, L-carnitine is the general metabolic support. Acetyl L-carnitine, we're more particularly interested in brain and the nervous system and sperm motility. And then L-carnitine tartrate is what we're thinking about when it comes down to exercise recovery and androgen receptor research. Now, that doesn't mean that like one only does one. I'm just kind of giving you a basic overview of what we have seen people use these for. So right now there's a little bit of research, but it is mostly, I'd say, anecdotally trying to figure out which is better where. All right, let's get to one of the most, I'd say, controversial areas, especially of recent, because injectable L-carnitine has become far more popular, I think, with the rise of more online medicine, more functional medicine, more longevity clinics. Now, the reason that injectable has become so popular is that oral is actually pretty lousy at being absorbed. Depending on the study, you can look at anywhere from 5 to upwards maybe 20% of the oral dose that is actually absorbable. Now, what's interesting though is that when the L-carnitine is found naturally in food, it seems to be absorbed substantially better. I think I've seen as high as maybe even 50%, and correct me in the comments. And one reason is probably because the intestinal absorption of carnitine is actually saturable. So if you slam down a couple grams, the percentage that's actually going to get absorbed is slightly lower. So it's probably has something to do with, if you have a steak and your steak's slowly being broken down and put in, versus just drinking 2 grams at once, you're only going to be able to absorb a smaller amount. So this is another one that, we'll talk about dosing. You're probably better off separating, especially if you're, spacing it out. So instead of doing 3 grams at once, maybe 500, 500, 500 because of the saturation of absorption. And that's why people then go, well, let's just go to injectable L-carnitine because that's going to go ahead and bypass that whole product, right? You don't have to mess with the intestinal wall if you're just injecting it, and then it's just going to get absorbed into your bloodstream. So it's almost seems to be about 10 times as the absorption, because like we said, 5%, you're going to absorb all of it. You can make some arguments then, is it getting broken down before it gets in your bloodstream and whatnot. But overall, you're going to pretty much all of it's going to get absorbed and go into your bloodstream. Now, one thing though is that muscle carnitine it's pretty regulated. So I wouldn't tell someone like you could just, inject 30 grams of L-carnitine because it's 10 times more effective because you're bypassing it. We don't really have evidence with that. And in particular, because it seems to be regulated, there's probably a threshold on how much you can inject and how much of that's going to be useful. So, we're still kind of figuring this out. Now, what I will say is that oral L-carnitine is pretty cheap comparative to injectable. And it depends on your source. I think the one I use, I think it's like Now Sports, and it's $40 or something for 30 or 40 servings of 3,000 milligrams. So, not a bad deal. Now, depending where you're sourcing your L-carnitine from, I know a lot of y'all are like, well, I'll just go to China and get the, research purposes only, which I chatted about, you can go ahead and do that. I mean, I should, as a doctor, I would say you definitely shouldn't do that. I have a medical license, and if I tell someone, inject this thing that says research purposes only, I can get in trouble. That's one of my biggest things that I just try and tell people. I'm like, look, if you do research purposes only, what's really convenient for the people that are selling it to you, they don't have any liability. So, hey, cool, take this bottle. Don't inject it, but we all know you're going to inject it, and then something bad happens, you got nowhere to go. if you're getting this from an online clinic, if you're getting it from a compounding pharmacy, if you were working with me and I'd say take that and something bad happens to you, like you can sue me and I have malpractice insurance. So please don't. But at the same time, just be cognizant of that kind of predicament. But it depends on where you're getting it from. And most often online, you're still looking at $100, $150 for 250 milligrams per ml, 30 mLs. It's pretty, I don't know what the lower, but it's 150, 200, like it can be probably 400 depending on where you're getting it. So yeah, from what I said earlier, those are 250 milligram per ml. So you get 1 ml, 30 servings. And I said earlier, 30 servings, 3,000 milligrams. There's a 10x difference. Milligram per milligram, it's almost 100x difference. But with the injectable, you need 10 times as less. The issue with that is you got to make sure, again, where you're getting it from, that it's formulated correctly. Often after it's mixed, you want the injection to go into your refrigerator. And then there's going to be other opinions on, after you poke the bottle top, you should be using it in 20, 30 days. So just kind of weighing out the plus and benefits, I'd say that, yeah, if you can do injectable, great. It's just often a little bit pricier. And you also have to inject. Right. And that's why often I do this with some other peptides, like BPC. I'd say, why not start with something oral, see if it benefits you a little bit, cheaper or easier, and then you can move to the injection and kind of see what's kind of going on there. And, maybe the juice is worth the squeeze there for you to throw a little more money down and, ultimately is your health. In my opinion, that should be one of your greatest investments. Now, another area of controversy is going to be TMAO. TMAO forms when oral L-Carnitine reaches your intestines. You have certain gut bacteria, and then they metabolize it into TMA, and then your liver converts it into TMAO. Higher circulating TMAO levels have been associated with cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis. So there are some really interesting studies showing that people who regularly eat meat can produce more TMAO from carnitine versus like vegetarians and vegans. And it seems like that could also just be a microbiome thing of how you're adapting. And, where are you eating this? Is this from McDonald's? And this is why I don't really like a lot of those studies. If you've been around here long enough, I am more animal-based most often. And I think one of the issues with most of the studies that were, coming out, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, is they're throwing in the vegetarians and the vegans with people who are, eating fast food all day long. And those aren't the same thing. And so we have this with a variety of markers, growth hormone, IGF-1, people, higher IGF-1. And it's like the environment, in my opinion, is going to be a bigger issue. But I got to, tell you about the data that we do have, some correlative data that shows that higher TMAO not only, affects your cardiovascular system, does seem like it may affect your kidney function. There's a microbiome issue there. I'm not, again, if you've been here, microbiome, I'm not the biggest believer that we actually know what's going on there. I view the body like a forest, like a terrain. And so someone goes, well, if you introduce a wolf in this forest, we know wolves are going to do this, right? We know that this strain is going to do this. I personally don't believe that yet. I did lots of gut health. I did lots of poop stools and all that. And they're like, oh, you have this strain of that bacteria, so we know it's going to do this. I'm not convinced. I think they're, again, like my correlation to an animal and environment. Yeah. If you introduce a wolf and, somewhere in Australia or somewhere in Africa comparative to Yellowstone, I think they're going to have different outcomes. And these, microbiome are all interacting with each other. So there's lots of variables here. My major takeaway from TMAO is, if I had to guess, I think that unhealthy people who have a tendency to eat more red meat, and I eat lots of red meat. I don't think red meat is unhealthy. I think it's a lot of the way it's prepared. There's often like lots of bread and lots of sugar around it that creates a not so good environment, more oxidative damage and oxidative stress from there. And yeah, I think it's more correlative than causative. Again, that's just my clinical opinion. I don't shy away from L-Carnitine. And you can do blood tests of TMAO. I don't really get too fearful of it personally. And maybe that bites me in the butt in the long term. I don't know. That's why we call it practicing medicine for a reason. We don't really know. I'm just providing the data that we do have, and I'm not going to ignore it and say, well, we don't, L-Carnitine, TMAO is nothing to worry about. It may be. I'm not too worried about it though. Now, with that being said, you're worried about it, you can do injectable, right? Because everything I just chatted about was the L-carnitine orally going into the gut. So, it does seem like if we do injectable, you don't have to worry about the TMAO concern as much. So you got options. There's different ways to go about this. So wrapping things up, I hope that you walked away being like, wow, L-carnitine does a lot more than just burning fat. And there is quite a bit of nuances, right? So does it participate in fatty acid oxidation? Yeah. And there also appears to be pretty modest, fat loss benefit. But to me, what makes carnitine very interesting is that everything else that we chat about underneath. So it's getting that fatty acid into the mitochondria to supporting it. That's cellular energy metabolism, overall helping the androgen receptors and possibly helping out with your testosterone, cognitive benefits, arterial and atherosclerosis, blood vessel benefits, brain benefits, nerve benefits. So overall, I think L-carnitine is one of the most unique supplements, and I think it has one of the better profiles for helping a wide variety of things. I throw it up there with, something like creatine, and in my clinical practice, it's like, TRT, low dose tadalafil, L-carnitine. I actually really like methylene blue. I mean, those are four of my favorite things that I have a lot of my guys on TRT stack. So I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. If you've used L-carnitine, if you have maybe some benefits that I missed, that'd be really cool if you stick it in the comments below. And, hey, if you're into this breakdown, you really enjoyed it, again, I appreciate your feedback, but also, hit that subscribe button and stick around. And if you'd like more information on breakdowns like this, you can check out my school community where I have lots of handouts and I have more dosing protocols there. Until next time, stay vigilant, my friends, and God bless.